among such distinguished collectors. I want to start by acknowledging my mentor. And I want to mention the source. I'm going to be saying a few words about how to put together a winning display. If you want to know about the source of a good display, I have an article here, and I have an outline by Larry Obi-Wan. Some people call the Yoda of displays, but I prefer Larry Obi-Wan. He is my mentor, and he is the person that is responsible for this yellow packet of paper, which came from the Idaho 20th anniversary. So to begin with, I want you to lean back. I want you to close your eyes. I'll wake you up. Our Bill will wake you up. Lean back, close your eyes, and think about those knives that you have back in the gun safe, under the bed, wherever you keep them. I want you to think about those. I want to see those eyes closed now. And I want you to think about how you can get from your mind's eye to an actual display. Now, if you're thinking about that at this time, I think there's something to be said.
Use the source, folks.
That's our best Star Wars interpretation of the Obi-Wan Kenobi and using the source. So this is the source. And I'll be mentioning this several times during the talk, but it is the definitive work, and I mean that sincerely. I know that when I was working on my display, Larry would say, take it out about every week. Look it over. Look the outline over. There's a checklist in there that is a judge's checklist, and then there is a timeless article by Brent on how to build a winning display. So you can't beat it. So my hope would be that by the time this hour ends, that you'll be able to go back home and use this, and maybe a few things that I said as well. So for now, though, if you'll get into that green folder, I'd like for you to put this behind my outline and get the outline out that has the spotlight display on it. Okay. What we're going to do today is a little different during this session than just looking at some slides. We're going to have some hands-on things. We're going to be looking at the outline more than we are things that are written on the screen. So we'll have some pictures up there. That's mandatory. You got to have some pictures. But the outline will be our source for today at least. But don't forget the real source. So if you've got this one put away for a while and this one out, then we'll begin. You got to ask yourself when you're thinking about going from just collecting to displaying, what do you like most? What knives are the most pleasurable to you? A lot of you I see in this room have already done displays, and it's an easy answer. I like Dukes, right? Or I like 110s, or I like Knights. All right. What I would ask you to do and challenge you to do is think about maybe some other more unique ways of displaying. And for instance, and we'll go with, what about organizations that are represented by such things, representing such things as scouting, the NRA, Ducks Unlimited? If you've got knives like that, you can put them together and create a display. Or if you have, and we'll go to the next one if we can. Bill, are you interrupting my person over there? I tell you what, I don't know what to tell you. I thought about this, and I seriously would like to see this happen. Somebody take some of the many series of knives that have been produced by Buck and put them together into a display.
Now, do you have that Kleenex there? I was told that there, when I showed these, that there would be some that might drool in the audience, so I took the liberty, and I do have other Kleenex here. Okay, so this is the Master Series, and one of my favorite set of knives, and I think others, and it's collectible in so many different, they are collectible in so many different ways. But what about this, or the Signature Series that had the checkered handles, but they were under walnut? And then the other type of thing that you might consider would be, what do you have that's all the same handle material, like the elk or ram's horn or that type of thing? So if you have any of those, that would be a good place to start. And you need to ask yourself at that point, how many do you have? Do I use all of them? Do I have enough? Do I need to acquire some? Do I need to narrow it down because I've got so many? In some of your cases, you definitely have to do that, or build another table's worth of displays, right, gentlemen? So, but the idea would be to come up with the right choice, and I think there's an automatic warning right at this point when you're deciding, and that is, what else is out there? You know, when I first went to Shepherdsville without a display, I'd never displayed a couple years ago, I was introduced to a young man named Alan Horner, and he is an expert on crosslocks, has a wonderful display of crosslocks. We had that in common. So as I was thinking about, okay, what am I going to display? I thought, yeah, I'll do crosslocks. Alan and I will work together, and we actually did for about 6 months in terms of sending information to each other. We shared, which, by the way, is the big difference between the Buck Collectors Club, some other organizations. You know, I think there's a real willingness. We'll get into that a little bit more. But if you're thinking about what to display, and you've got several different categories of knives, you might think twice about displaying crosslocks. It's been done. It's been done well. You know, I'd be a little leery to do David Yellowhorse knives, considering, you know, how can you compete with Gene, or Dukes with Jimmy? So, but the thing is, if you do decide, guess what? Those gentlemen will help you do it, and they'll be unselfish in terms of sharing the information they have. They'd probably say, sure, nothing wrong with 2 displays, let's go ahead and do it. But anyway, the idea there would be, you might want to look at what you have versus what's been done. And I know the club members, the officers, in their writing in the various newsletters, have encouraged us to pick categories that would broaden the field. And in talking with, where's Heath? You in here, Heath? In talking with Heath yesterday, he said, well, you know, he kind of took exception to that word winning. Well, he said, I want to educate, and I want to educate not only the members that are represented in here, but the youth. And that's a wonderful idea, Heath. I really appreciate you saying that. But the idea would be that if there's a whole room or auditorium full of all the different kinds of buck knives, the education becomes more and more complete. So that's why I would say give a thought to broadening our horizons as a club. All right? So once you do make the decision, though, you've got to ask yourself another big question, and that is, what do I have that goes with this knife that's not a knife? Now, the fancy word for that is accoutrements. And accoutrements, according to the Webster's Unabridged Dictionary, is stuff that goes with knives to make them look better. Okay? That's definition number 3. But the idea of accoutrements, probably to me, is the most fascinating part of going from just collecting just those knives in that safe, just those knives under that bed, to the display that educates the public and educates us as collectors. And so accoutrements, I'm going to spend some time on accoutrements. When, for instance, Wild Bill informed us that the knives for Dee's award-winning Gen 5 display were going to be made of moose horn, we started immediately looking for, if I can find it, I knew this had happened. The moose disappeared on me. Ah, there he is. We started looking for something like this. And I think if we look up here, we might even find another variety there. Let's see. Nope, I guess maybe we'll have to wait on that. But the accoutrement that goes best with a moose horn knife might be one of these, a silhouette right next to it. All right. The simplest accoutrement, and we hear Joe and everybody talking about this, would be the sheath. I hear all this about these sheaths way back when that changed, and nobody really knew when and where and all that. One of the objects that Dee and I had when we started talking about Gen 5s was, hey, this is a fresh new knife, and all that information's available. I mean, from the very start. They've undoubtedly, we can find out anything we want about that. Doesn't work that way either, okay? It doesn't work that way. There's still, even on a knife that's been out only a few years, there's still that answer to your question when you say, well, what happened at this point in time? Well, we're not quite sure. We're not quite. We think there was a sketch that started this all, and there was a challenge and all that. But anyway, when I was listening this morning to the presentation on 110s, there was this big discussion about sheaths, and even on a knife as young as the Gen 5, you realize that there's been a sheath change. The accoutrement for a Gen 5 display could very easily show that when the GYS, diamond wood, when the diamond wood first came out, it had a sheath that really looked like a tactical sheath, and it could go both ways. It has changed, and I'm getting the look from Joe that I wanted to see. It was like you knew it, you suspected it, but you weren't quite sure, and it already has changed, as has the other, what I call production knife, the RWS, the rosewood knife. It's had a change as well. So there's an accoutrement right off the bat with that, and there are sheaths out there that, when placed side by side with the knife, do just what an accoutrament's supposed to do, enhance it. Okay. When we displayed the 5 custom knives that Leroy and Wild Bill collaborated on with the handle material for Dee's Gen 5s once again, we got a logo for Wild Bill Cody, his typical logo that he's wearing on his hat right there. But we didn't have anything for Leroy, and we wanted to give credit to R and to Wild Bill Cody knives. So Leroy got to feeling kind of guilty about that and couldn't find the actual logo, so you know what he did? He sent me his belt buckle and said, let Dee use this. All right. And again, that's that spirit of, I'd call it the shirt off your back kind of a thing. Sure, they're in business, but there's a willingness to share and to have that enhancement for and help for you from a lot of Buck members and from Wild Bill, and it's a good thing. And I think I would encourage that. You know, the more we can do that, the better. All right. I think we might be ready for the next one now. Let's see. Yeah. This is another accoutrement in a way. It's the sun's coming in, so I apologize for that. If you can see that, an accoutrement can very easily be something as simple as the knife in its component parts. You show that next to your regular collection, and it educates the public. So that's another type of accoutrement that I would recommend. I'm going to have to check and see on my next slide if we're ready. Well, Bill, let's go ahead and show that, because that gives the idea of how we were trying to determine from these moose horn knives how we could show not only what they're made of, the handles are made of, but who made them. Okay, that together is the accoutrement enhancing the knife. And that, you don't get any better than that in a, not only in an individual case, but in the overall scheme of things. All right. Some of you already know this. You know what this is? Piano key. All right. When I was doing the handle material, I decided that I had an ivory knife that had a Macedon on it. Remember the one? I got it from Vern Taylor, the Macedon ivory. And I thought, you know, there's a piano ivory out there, and wouldn't that be interesting? And I also had a story of my own. And I think that a story is what you're really after when you put all this together. You're going to tell a story. And the sub-story, I guess you'd say, really had to do with a piano that was made about the same time that Hoyt Buck was making his first knife, about turn of the century. And years later, there was a rich couple, we described it as that in our hometown, and this rich couple had a piano in their parlor. It was long ago enough that there was a parlor. My uncle did odd jobs, chores for them. When my uncle was finished doing his chores, they would invite him in, the man and the wife, and probably give him a cold drink of water, but they also allowed him to play the piano. And my uncle had a gift for playing the piano. He heard a song once, he could play it all the way through and never forget it again. And so there was this progression that took place where the couple would actually invite their friends in, and my uncle would entertain them. He later became a professional pianist and did that for his entire life. But there was a point in time where this rich couple had the same kind of attitude that we talked about in the Buck Collector Club. They didn't give him the shirt off their back, they gave him the piano. And that piano was then put in my grandmother's house, and I listened to my uncle play the piano. Then the piano was given to my mother and went down our basement at my house. And if you look here, in 1955, that young man playing the piano is me. We'll get to the main point of this in a minute. But the fact of the matter is that basements aren't too kind to pianos. It ruined it. My dad took it apart, kept all the parts except the heavy stuff, and sent them out. Come on in, Leroy. I've already talked about you a little bit, but make yourself comfortable. All right. I just showed him the belt buckle that you were kind enough to give me. But anyway, the piano was taken apart, and all the keys and a lot of the other material, soundboard and all that, were kept at my dad's house and then kept it at our house. So, make the long story almost short, Leroy and I started talking about piano ivory. And he says, well, it's kind of thin, but I think I can work it out. Well, the fact of the matter is that when I shared the piano story with Leroy, he got a little bit interested in that, and I think you probably have a copy of the piano story on the wall of your workshop. And when we talked back and forth, it was one of those things that, as an artisan, I think when he knows more about the inside story, he's able to create more, and that gives you another idea of a good accoutrement. So, make another try at being a short-winded, which is not my style. The piano key ivory was shipped to Leroy, and at that same time, we were doing work with the Buck Custom Shop data and research into what it was all about. Of course, Leroy was very much involved in that, Wild Bill. And so what we had here was a connection. And the more we thought about it, the more we thought about that thing you could do back in the 80s. You could pick a knife model and pick up material, and you could send it in, and Buck would make a knife for you out of that material, and it could be anything you wanted. So we got to talking about the idea that if I'm going to do a handle material display, what better thing to connect Uncle Jack, my playing the piano in the 50s, the story itself, the fact that the piano was made about the same time Hoyt Buck was making it, all that went together. Leroy created 2 piano key knights. He did all of this. He didn't just create the knives, he used the rivets that the strings were attached to and the sounding board to come up with an entire package that was very much like a customer, me, talking to a knife representative, no longer at Buck, but still a knife representative who could transfer my thoughts into a knife. So that to me is the idea of accoutrements. If you want a better idea even than that, look at Russ Donohue's idea of how to take 700 series and the theme of Western or corral or all that. When you look at the idea of having a lariat and having horseshoes or having whatever it would take, barbed wire, whatever it would take to create that theme, then think for a moment if he hadn't have been imaginative, excuse me, if he hadn't have been imaginative, he might have put those knives in a display and called them brown-handled horsey knives, right? Okay, so what he's got then is a connection with the knives and with the things that go with those knives. All right, enough about accoutrements. Let's talk a little bit about knife placement, and if you will, I would like to stop for a moment and just let you know that I'm going to be going through the sheets of paper, and I would encourage you just to follow along. We will be referring at times to the right-hand side of the pocket. You'll see a picture of a G5 snakewood, and we'll be going through those as well as we go along. But for now, one last comment, and that would be that if you had to talk about balance, too many knives, as it says there, too many knives, you don't get to tell the story. Too many accoutrements, and they detract from the knife and the knives. If you look at this display over here, I would say that this and Rusty's display, for me personally, are the perfect blend of accoutrements and the knives themselves. And that gives you Larry's story or Rusty's story. And that's what I think it's all about. So when you get to that stage and you've got those enhancements, you're in good shape. All right, let's go on to knife placement, if you would, please. And this is a point where you've made your decision, you know what you've got, it's time to get them out of the box. It's time to get them out of the box, and at that point, if you let me turn my page, you start looking at what you have and how to subgroup them, and that's when it's a good time to make your decision. Okay, we're going to do all Gen 5s, and if so, among those Gen 5s, what do we have? Different handle material. We have award knives. We have, again, knives with different sheaths and all that. So that's when you start thinking about how to lay them out. And while you've got them out like this, as Leroy mentioned to me, this is a good time to clean them. All right? And I think maybe we've got a picture of that next. There's the dedication to Leroy Rimmer on the knife cleaning. That's his monument. He would suggest that you go, and I think California had a corner on the market about a year ago on Mother's Magwax. It wasn't in Illinois for a long time, but I finally found it with the idea of having the Magwax, the Johnson's wax, gives you a combination of what to clean the metal with and what to clean the handle with. It works on everything, Except maybe if you get one of those darkened handles that might not be, I've noticed that might makes it a little darker, yeah. And so if you're a purist and you want it to be exactly the same color, you might want to watch out. But the idea is, while you got those knives out, clean them up, and that means you're probably going to handle them with a cloth or one of those white gloves from then on. But it's a good time to do that. So clean them, and at that point, you're ready to start thinking about the subgroups and starting to define your space. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to mention that before you ever order your cases, and this is in the yellow sheet as well, before you ever order your cases, before you ever make your decision, you've got to have a simulation of some kind. And I don't have my cardboard here, but imagine a piece of cardboard with an outline of a case on it, and that would be one way of doing it. What Dee and I used for both displays was really, I'll get this, we took, I think I can do that from back here, we took just plain old Christmas wrap and put them in configurations, and if you can imagine this having our various subgroups of knives on it, it allowed us to see the spaces needed. I'll hold that up. How's that? Can you see back there? All right. I'm glad this isn't the plywood that I saw in the back. But the idea is that you not only can place them, you can rearrange them until you get that ideal look. So that placement is very important. All righty. Let's go ahead and just show the various pictures, 14 through 17D, and we're a little far ahead there, I think. Or maybe I went a far ahead, yeah. Okay, yeah. It's me, yeah. I can talk about these, then we'll get back to that. When we talk about subgroups, I wanted to put a couple of examples up here of a subgroup being pearl handle or pull shell. If you go back to that just for a moment, the other way these could be displayed would be that they are knives with what? File work, right? So you've got those choices to make. And then the next one just shows, again, award knives that have this different handle materials. That could be the starting point for another display, which it was. And I think we're back now to where we can show some, you start with a piece of paper that defines a case, you start putting knives on it, that gives you a feel for space needed, placement of knives. Go on to looking at the overall backboard, space that is available. You put your knives would be spaces there. And notice that there's also, we're starting to look at what the accoutrements are. A picture would be appropriate there. And go ahead, Dee. And again, on the board you've got that. And so you've got a variety of ways to do that. And then the one last one I would show would be, you've got a case that you've used in another display. If you look at this, that's the shell, and I guess I should do this if I can find it. Oh, yes, okay. Anyway, if you look at the shell case that I already had created for the handle display, that became the space needed for the 3 Cabela knives that are in our Gen 5. So anyway, the idea there is that you can use a variety of things to define your space. And you don't want to be ordering more cases than you need. That's expensive. But worse than that is you don't want to be finding out that you have one less than you need, or that the case that you chose has room for one less knife than you want. You know, that brings tears to your eyes if you have that. So that's the idea of being able to choose your space. I guess I would read this because this is the way I feel. Do whatever is necessary to predetermine the dimensions and number of cases needed. Know how much space to allow for on the tabletop and the backboard. And I think that kind of sums that portion of it. Next thing will be labels, if you would turn. All right. And as it says, a label can't tell it all, but it's got to tell enough. If you'll also reach in and pull the first sheet with that picture of the G5, and I assume you all might realize that the G5 was called that before it became all other subsequent models were the Gen 5. But the G5 sheet of paper that you see there is an example of research and gathering data. And how does it relate to labels? Well, you've got to know about the knife before you choose what to put on a label. And if you have a label that tells enough information and enhances your story, it will come from the amount of research you do. I would like to ask that each of you take an opportunity to look at a couple of books that were created for the, well actually the Gen 5 book. We'll get that out a little later during the day, and it will show you some of the research that's been done, at least on the Gen 5s. And I would encourage this as the starting point for labels. Okay. Gather all the possible information you can. All right. Then, rather than running out and ordering your labels from a sign company, the next suggestion, if you'll pull out the next sheet of paper, the next suggestion would be put those labels on a computer printout, and while you're at it, define the space needed for each label. And if you notice, it goes all the way from the individual knife labels to the main labels that are used in identifying the various things, including the name of the case itself. When you define the space, it helps you in two different ways. It obviously allows you to know, by putting that label that's been cut out of paper, you can know how much room you're going to need, and you're going to know not to get the knives too close together. Okay, so you've got the, and the second thing is that most sign companies charge, and I don't know how consistent this is, but somewhere around 20 cents a letter and 20 cents a square inch. So that'll give you the idea of how much you are willing to spend. And sometimes when you find out how much you're willing to spend, the paper itself looks mighty good, right? So none of this is exactly inexpensive, but it again, when you do labels, Heath, you're educating the public. You know that when they see this label, they know that these are not common knives. You know, you get the rare, you got the idea that they were made, one was never actually put into production. Those things are so important in educating the public and each other. That is a very big part of the display. I would personally say too that the one thing that keeps a display from being a winning display in some cases, put two side by side, is the label being perfectly aligned, and having that you almost have to be obsessive compulsive. And if you look at, and I think that's, let's see if we've got the yeah, this is that part of placing the label that really does get into being obsessive. If you notice, if you notice, our labels at least have an adhesive back. When you get them exactly where you want them, and you want to put them exactly that way in the finished product, you pull the label up, you peel off the back, and in order to get it in the same place, if you use other smaller labels to define the exact area, you can place that right back in the same place. I know that's a little obsessive, but it it is that visually pleasing thing, and you'll hear me mention that several times. It's that visually pleasing thing that truly makes a display much more appealing to the public, and if you're into that kind of thing, to the judges, by all means. So, if you notice that in terms of labels, as we said, there's a label that has to do with what the main theme of each or subgroup is. There's a very important label here that we might as well mention now. It says for display only. I think we've been advised in a lot of different ways to say that, so the people aren't asking, well, how much is this knife? I want that one. You don't want to be bothered with that. They need to know it's for display only. If anything, I would say that's too small. If you look at Rusty's, it says it in a big way out there. You know, these knives aren't for sale. So anyway, you've got these various kinds of labels, both in the cases. That's where your research comes. And then outside the cases, here's another important one: your name, your BCCI number, and your address. That helps, and it's also on that judging sheet. Without your name, they don't appreciate that. Again, if you're into the judging part of it. All right. I guess you'd have to say that the ultimate label is the sign. And if you look at that label, you can go back 100 yards, and you know that when you get to this display, it's going to have some very interesting things. Larry is kind of a just the facts, ma'am kind of guy. You know, he's the kind of person that his personality reflects that he wants the public to know exactly what he's displaying. Now I kind of went the gimmicky way and the play on words way, and I'd had this running around in my head for a long time before I ever made a display. How do you handle a buck knife? Well, very carefully. You've heard, how many times have you heard that said about a variety of things? But then you had to figure out what other things constitute a handle on a buck knife. Beautiful, and then of course with an eye toward function. So the whole theme then translated in to the subgroups that I had. And that is the way the labels were taken care of. Now you have to, if you would, go to display choices. I think that the idea of display choices is entirely up to you. It gets back to that personality we just talked about. Gets back to your willingness to fund the project, your preferences, if you would. And the ones that I've listed here will, I think they will all afford you the opportunity to visit if you just look around. And I think that I have to say again, when I showed up in Shepherdsville, the first thing that happened was that this gentleman over here bounded across the floor and greeted us, you know, with a bear hug and said, "Come on over, and let me show you some buck displays." So Ken Burns was that ambassador that he always is, made Dee and I feel instantly welcome. And I remember walking, I'll just tell you that I think I wrote this in an article once. I remember walking past all these case knives that were like lined up in a row. You know, now I apologize if there's somebody in here that might collect those too. I have 10 dots, by the way. But all these case knives were just all laid out on a table, unimaginative. And then I looked over and there's this row of stuff, this great looking display that told the story, and I thought, now that's what it's all about. So I get over there, and Larry and Alan are sitting there, and they start talking to me about how to put a display together. Come on, let me show you this. Let me show you the back. Let me show you this. Let me show you that. And so I kind of summed that up by, on display choices, if you're in your outline, you look at the winning displays, you study it closely, you walk around it. Well, did I forget with owner's approval? But you look around it, take pictures, take notes, draw diagrams, ask questions. Dee and I left Shepherdsville with a small green notebook, and we started, not only had we put words in there, but we started talking about what we had seen to take back to begin our process. So after all that, you look around, you pick a style. Okay? If you want to know about tabletop only, and that's, like, okay, I would suggest seeing this gentleman. My apologies, your picture wasn't in there at the time. I think you were getting something to eat at that moment. But anyway, Murray has tabletop. He has some, and I even if there's a vertical type case displayed, I'd still call that tabletop if it's not attached. So the tabletop would be possible to be seen if you looked at Murray's or Ken and Vicky's. Vertical see-through, my words, it's not an official thing, but if a vertical see-through, you're gonna see the perfect way of doing that. And I don't know if Gene, did you invent that method? See it somewhere. I think I remember in Idaho, I asked you for the diagram. I wanted the blueprints for that. But that vertical see-through gives you an opportunity to see not only the front of the knife, but the back of the knife. And that is also used by Jimmy in his beautiful arrangement of dukes. So if you want to see yellow horses and dukes and see everything about them, that vertical see-through would be the way to go. Vintage buck store displays. Craig has used that very effectively, and others. I noticed, did anybody else drool when somebody said there was a buck case? By the way, I don't know, was that an old buck case that was still in its wrapper that was mentioned yesterday? Supposed to be downstairs. Did anybody? Well, there was a lot of interest in that. So evidently it wasn't that vintage, but very effective way. Filling those slots that would have been offered in the 70s by the knife that would have been in there. That's a great way to display. And Craig, I said, and then the angled boxed in, my words again, but John Forsman has that beautiful way of displaying knives here. And so that was definitely one that I considered, and you should too. The one I call the vertical backboard and tabletop combination would be, just for 3 examples, would be Allen's, would be Larry's, and then the one that was done as a result of looking at those two, this one here. And then Dee's, that's not here, on her Gem 5s. So the vertical backboard would be the one we're going to talk about today because it's my seminar, right? So I don't know how to build those other ones, but and maybe Gene will give me those diagrams and blueprints someday, but for now let's talk about that. So, and remember too, when you're considering all this, let's just stop for a moment and remember that the tabletop that you're going to is going to vary in size. So it's not too, yes, what we got?
Across the aisle, got the displays on the other side, on the other clubs and the other people.
Yeah.
Look at it compared to ours.
Shabby.
There's really no comparison.
There's no comparison.
I only point this out because Craig wanted me to.
That's okay.
But it is a good comparison, and it'll work for us later. Yes, sir.
You're not so shabby when there's something you want it.
That's true. That's true.
Those are Girl Scout knives right there.
Oh, there is that. Yes,
That lady.
there is an axe in there. If you believe Girl Scout, I should say. Anyway, there is an axe in there that is like one of a kind with this lady. I've talked with her 2 years in a row. She is it. Joe, I think we were talking about that when we were mentioning one of the 6s. But the Girl Scout axe was just, she'd been looking for this all her whole collecting life. Found it between Atlantis. So yeah, so you can't.
An enthusiastic collector, even if it's not buck. Well, you can, but if it's a Girl Scout, well. Anyway, that is that's another story. let's go ahead and talk about backboards and braces. And this is where we get into some kind of hands-on, not exactly hands-on for you, but I got to do a change in the guard here. Show you the nuts and bolts behind some of this. Let's see if I can pull this off. I think I'm okay at the moment until that falls. There we go. Pardon my back. I'm supposed to do that in a presentation, I know. All right, I guess I'll stand out here. The idea here is that when you are ready to do the vertical backboard, if you choose our style, you need to choose a wood that's is a good wood. And I found that the thing called a rock-aply, AC plywood from Lowe's, is perfect in every way for at least me. The only thing I would say is that if they made something in the same quality, a little thinner, I think that might be good, because that's heavy, as you can tell. And again, cutting your boards into sections will allow you to make sure that they're not too heavy. But at any rate, the main feature of this $30 sheet of 4x8 plywood is that that's pretty reasonable for a good quality like this, what I would call maritime. But it also, if you do get something like this at Lowe's, they cut it free, and that's worth its weight in gold. And so if you pick out your board, as when you pick out plywood or any other lumber, you go through a couple and you get the best one, and you bring it back and you tell them what you want. Cut it vertically, 2-foot section, 3 foot in the middle, 2 foot over here. Now, we just happen to have a way of doing the sign that's a little different. We use the top 6 inches of the 4x8 plywood to create the backboard for the sign. And we use dowel rods to connect. I had never in my life heard of a doweling jig before. Has anybody ever used a doweling jig? Have you? Okay, right. I had never heard of this. The fellow at church had one of these and said, well, I know how you can get those dowel rods to be exact. And this is used in conjunction with a drill. And you've got the exact location of your sign. So you've got the top 6 inches, you've got everything together. And so that is the beginning. The next thing will be your padding. Larry uses packing foam, I think it's called. And say it again? Polyfoam, okay. You do know, okay, all right. And let me see where it is. Different names for different things, but Dream Poly. My wife is a quilter. What you got? My wife is that right? Dream Poly? She's a quilter, and so she's come across this. And when we were searching for the packing material that Larry used, we happened to come across this, and it has the advantage of adhering to the board, and that means a lot when you're getting it all coordinated. And so these are the two types of things that could be used for the foam. And then of course you choose your cloth not only for its quality, but for the color. You don't want a cloth to compete with the knives in such a way that it detracts. And so you pick a color that's subtle, but has a good quality to it. All right. Any questions on any of that? All right. All right. The braces and clamps. You talk about bending over backwards or giving your shirt off your back. If you look at the next, I called Larry or emailed him. We did a lot of that back when I was starting. I called him and I said, I'm having trouble. I'm a visual person, and the description you gave me of the braces that hold this thing up, I can't compute that. Could you just give me an idea of how I go about making those? So about 3 days later, I get this, and if you'll pull that out, this very simple drawing. And if you want to know how to build a brace to hold up a backboard, you can't go wrong with this. All right? And what you have here is the result of that, if you look at that. And each one of the uprights either has one or two. If it's a heavy grouping of knives, I'd recommend two, or the giant economy size. You can get the 6-inch, you can get the 8-inch. But the idea is then that you keep the braces together with the rest of your display, and they all are interchangeable, but it's a good idea, I think, just to kind of mark them to know which. It's easier when you're in the middle of putting up your display to have the ability just to turn the board around. Know where it goes. And if I have my drill, but I don't think I'm going to take the time. Put it right in there. And then, after you put the brace on the board, you use the C-clamp that's down there on the floor, and I'll get that up. Can you all see that? Did I need to hold that up? Please no. But the C-clamp, of course, is the standard operating procedure for holding those in. Found out, where's Jim Siegel? Couldn't find, here. Found out that these tables have a wider lip, and we had to switch to a 4-inch instead of a 3-inch. And so there's always little things like that you have to be prepared for. All right, so that takes care of that. Let's keep on the boards and braces and go down to where it says cases, about halfway down the page. And I'm going to suggest that I'm going to show you this, and then I'm going to suggest you see Dee, who's the expert on this. But in terms of, first of all, we chose Cox custom cases as a result of a recommendation by John Forsman. Heath and I talked, and you've gone with them. Excellent craftsmen, and they've got a hanging system that I love. And what this shows is once you mount, that's the doweling jig, so I think we might have a picture of, don't have a picture of that. Okay, well, just stick with that. What you've got is you identify the placement of your hangers on your raw wood. Then you've put your backing on, you put your material on, and you got to know where those holes used to be, right? Or still are, but you can't find them. So Dee's come up with a way of identifying them through newspapers that then are superimposed. And so once you get everything together, the thing I like about this particular type of hanger is that you can just rotate. You know this won't work, but I'm going to try it anyway. You can rotate it, put it in, well, I'm off mic, okay? And notice this, just take it and slide it in. Now, and I think I'm going to do it, be able to do it, and that's all there is to it. You've got, instead of just two places where it's hanging and that possibility of it tilting, you've got support all the way across. So that's, and by the way, plan ahead, you know how you say that? When I put this together, did you notice that I got it sideways? And
we'll talk more about Tommy Tenderfoot in a little bit, but it's certainly the best laid plan sometime would work. All right, so that's enough about that. Thank you, sir. Good catch. I think it's time to talk about the placement of the knives in the cases themselves. And what I did, and some of you may have noticed this, I had invited an old friend of mine whose name is Tommy Tenderfoot. Now, how many of you have been affiliated with Scouting at some time in your life? And I imagine there might even be a Scoutmaster in here. There was a thing called the Scoutmaster's Memorial. And when preparing for certain things, you invited Tommy Tenderfoot in because he was an example. He was an example of everything you could do wrong. So, if you had camp out coming in January, you'd invite Tommy in, and he'd show up in his flip-flops, his shorts, and his t-shirt. July, he would show up with 3 wool coats, mucklucks, and a sock hat or something. The idea was that through showing what was wrong, you would get the boys in that case to know what was right. So what we've done here, to have some fun, we've created a Tommy Tenderfoot case. And this case has at least 20 things absolutely wrong. From those wrong things in that case, I'd like to just discuss with you very briefly the things that are on the sheet that's marked things to consider. We won't go into all of these, but I do want to encourage you to look over them because these are the pitfalls that keep your display from telling your story. If somebody's distracted by a dirty knife, if you have crowded your knives, if I could just go down the list, if you have let the labels touch, or a big one, let the label fall into the crater of the knife, you know, that there's so many things to avoid. As you go down there, folding knives, if you see a folding knife that's right beside it, it's all the way open, and one right beside it is halfway open, unless there's a reason, you know, I think you should consider making them all consistent. And again, if you look now online, you can't find too many that are open because my emphasis was on handle material. So thanks to a discussion with John early on, I said, has anybody ever left them all closed? Because I'd never seen it. He said, well, what are you trying to accomplish? And I was accomplishing handle materials, so I wasn't really interested in open. But if they are open, I think they should be open at the same angle. It gives a good feel for them. And you know, the people in here know that much better than I. Tags and labels should be straight. Talked about that. Check everything for misspelling. I want you to pay particular attention to the title here, if you would, on this one. Display cloth should not clash. Oh, did he ever get that wrong? All right, but it's important. If you're looking at a display and you have a hard time finding the knife because of the cloth that's used, plaid or whatever, it's going to ruin your story. All right. Avoid exaggerated rarity. I want you to look for that in particular. Labels should match. Should be all the same size, tell the same information in most cases. Know your knife models and their buck numbers. Locate labels as to avoid contradiction or confusion. Place knives within the boundary or the edge of the glass. That's a biggie when you forget about the border and you close the lid and the knife is, again, half of it's out. And then I mentioned open the folders. What we've tried to accomplish today is the idea that you go from that collection that is under the bed, and that all that is a grouping of knives, a collection. Nobody knows about it. Of course, you don't want anybody to know about it. That's why you hide it. But when you're at a display, you're starting that process of being a Buck Collectors Club member who is sharing and who is educated. And I think that's very important. So things to look for, and I won't go over those exactly verbatim on that, but look for whether or not you have the title, whether you've got the, I'll tell you what, the best thing to show you what you should look for, other than looking over this, would be to look over a judge's sheet that's included in that blue packet of paper, blue, yellow packet of paper, and you have a chance to see what judges expect of you, and that guides you in that direction. If you take the things I've said today, take at home, get out this yellow sheet of paper, read Bird's article, go by Larry's outline, look at that judge's sheet, put all that together, make the decision to start before the next show. You can have an enjoyable winter creating that display. And if you create the display correctly, Leroy, Wild Bill, and Dee, would you come up here, please?
Okay.
You create the display correctly.
Put it in that one.
Right there, that's good enough. Your display, relatively speaking, when you put it out there on the floor, will be like this picture, a rose between or among the thorns. With apologies to those two. Thank you very much. Any questions? I'm sure there are things I did not cover. I know I didn't talk about the skirt. I'm not into the skirts too much, but he took care of that. Yes, sir.
Mentioned about table sizes, because they vary in
I
shape.
briefly said something that, yeah, you can be prepared for a 30-inch table. And if you look at that, a big thing about the thank you crate, because the big thing about what Larry was saying on that whole diagram page was this space right here. I call it the dead zone, and I think Larry referred to it as dead space. But if you prepare for a 30-inch table and you get there and it's 24, you've got a problem, especially if your cases are down so low you can't scoot these back. So be prepared. This was a little bit of a challenge today, not really as much as being unprepared for 24 inches, but 2 6-foot tables just means you gotta position it a little differently than if you had it. So, and the C-clamps, yeah, the C-clamps, having a bigger, by the way, I tried those kind of clamps that kind of back down, whatever they called, and for my particular way of doing things here, it didn't work. It just wasn't holding it the way I wanted to. So we went back to the C-clamps on the second display. Marge, did I mention these?
You did. You mentioned Dee won the award at the Atlanta show. First woman butt collector person to do that, I think.
That's my wife. Rose among the thorns. Yes, sir.
Is that a stock, that's rail support on your book backboard there, is that a stock piece of wood?
Yes, that's not plywood, that's stock.
Is that a particular rail shape, or what is that?
Well, that's rail shape that was invented by Larry. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, what, I mean, I'm talking about the hanger.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's the wood, the same wood as the cases, the cherry wood, right? Cherry wood cases that the Cox provide. They provide those.
It's a
one per.
B-rail system.
Yeah,
It's a
they
B
provide
rail.
that.
No, they provide it.
They really.
Or you can buy a piece of 1x2 of 45 angle right to that hole.
You could do the same thing.
There's a more economical way, and if you're good with wood, which I'm not, you can do that. Cox, I think their original idea was that these display cases might be on a wall, so those are kind of like wall hangers. I did want to mention too, the ones that aren't mounted provide that angle that is recommended to avoid the glare. So in each of the cases on the tabletop, they're at a slight angle. Now they're not at an angle like you would see with John's, because you can't raise it up, especially on the 24-inch table, beyond that dead zone. space. So, but anyway, so I think that whole angle that is accomplished by what I call the boxed-in type that John Forsman has, you can't beat that. So, you know, you can get compromises with whatever you choose. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Make sure the cases are secure.
Make sure the cases are secure. Lock them up. And when you, other than the judging night, when you leave, cover them with a cloth. Most do. On judging night, you cover them with a cloth, and they'll judge just the ones they can see, so you don't want that. Or they will judge it all. So you get a good point. Lock them up. And obviously, in addition to locking them up, make sure you don't have anything out that can be stolen. You don't choose one knife and put it on top of the glass, for instance. Okay, I had one last night. Not always. I mean, there's good security, but you have to consider this.
No, that's a good point. We did that, the one at the plane shows, we had extra, it's like hats and things. Some people walk by, took the hats and books,
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah. and you catch them at the door and they say, "Oh, I thought those were people."
Yeah.
Right.
If you don't cover stuff or have it secured, they will, at the minimum, they'll move it around. They'll take it up and pick it up and look at it, and they'll set it down where you don't want it. So you want stuff covered or secured.
Now, if anybody has an idea of what to do with a 5-year-old with an ice cream cone, yeah. Interesting with this one over here. Anything else?
A pit bull.
Pit bull, yeah. Thank you so much.